another episode of Watercolor Fundamentals. This is episode 12, Mixing Color. I was kind of inspired to do this today because I have recently made a couple changes to my palette, and I've been playing around with the colors, and it's got me thinking about how I mix them. And really there are, well, I'm sure there's, well, maybe there isn't, three main ways to mix color when we're painting with watercolor. One of them is mixing it in your palette or on a plate or whatever surface it is that you use to mix your color. Another one is mixing your color on the paper. But it is like a wet on wet technique, creating a bit of a variegated wash. So we will, as a byproduct of this episode, be talking a little bit about variegated washes. And then the other one is layering colors on top of each other. So once you have a color that's dry, if you go over top of it with another color, they will optically mix and produce another result. It's due to the transparent aspects of watercolor. Some would call it glazing. It's a term I'm also familiar with as well, though I just keep it simple. It's just layering, really, to me. I could be wrong, but then again, self-taught, so I'm gonna figure these things out along the way. So let's start by mixing up a couple colors here. So I'm just putting a little bit of water in my palette, something you've seen me do before. I always start with the water. Just getting excess water out of my brush. And then I'm going to pick a couple colors to use for today. I'm going to use my earth orange, which is quinacridone burnt orange. I don't know if you see when I'm mixing this up, there's some little particles of clumped pigment in here. So when I'm mixing up the color on its own, I will try to thoroughly mix it, let the paint clumps dissolve into the mixture. Let's get some of that excess paint out and then clean my brush. And again, I'm getting excess moisture out of my brush by just tapping it into the sponge. So I've got the water that I want there. I don't want to add any more. And then I'm going to mix over here a really lovely pigment, Ultramarine Turquoise. This is something I'm experimenting with right now. This used to be Prussian green, but I've been doing a little research on the pigments I was using, and I still love them. They're still great, but I'm just going for a little bit more of a spread chromatically around the wheel. So this is a little bluer than the Prussian green. It's also got a higher chroma. It's a lot brighter. Okay, so there's a little mixture of ultramarine turquoise. I think the easiest thing for me to do is to kind of start in the middle of the three that I mentioned. So I mentioned mixing color in the palette, mixing the color on the paper, and then layering the color on top of each other, one at a time. That's three different ways we can produce a mixed color result on our paper. So the first one I'm going to do is the second one I mentioned, mixing color on the paper, because I've got these all mixed up. It's just easier to do that. And then I will use these puddles to make a new mixture in this third well here. And then we will make a little strip. I will dry it, and then we will layer the other color over top of it, and then you can see the result. Are you ready? If you're not, push pause. So I'm going to load my brush up with a little bit of my quinacridone burnt orange, and I'm just going to make a little shape here. I'm just moving my brush through the shape, keeping it nice and wet, making sure my brush is all the way through it, and then I'm just going to clean that brush, get all the excess moisture out, sponge, towel, doesn't matter. And then I'm going to pick up some of this turquoise, and we're just going to bring it right inside. And you can see it takes that nice bright turquoise, which is towards the blue, and I'll leave some of that little orange there. But we get little bits of the blue, bits of the resultant dull green, and then we have the burnt orange kind of poking through. And so this is a version of a variegated wash where you can see the colors kind of on their own, and you know, you can do maybe a little bit less the turquoise, leave more of the orange, so on and so forth. But when they mix, you kind of get the overall impression of a different, more subdued green, but you still get some of the flavor of the other colors. And as this dries out, depending on the pigments, sometimes they will kind of separate a little bit, create a lovely little flocculation in the result, and it can be very pretty. So that's mixing color on the paper. Whatever shape you're going to use, I mean, this is a really great method if you're going to, you know, paint a forest using a couple different versions of green. You know, you can kind of mix them on the paper, and you just get these subtle little variations in your result, which is really quite lovely. Now, the other thing we can do is we will take our color. I'll take some of this burnt orange, and I'm just going to bring that over here. Clean the brush. I got the excess moisture out of it. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to clean the brush, get the excess moisture out. And then I'm going to pick up some of this, and I'm going to start mixing it in here. I think I'm going to grab just a little bit more. And if I take that and come down beside it, you can see I do get, you know, a nice green. But when I look at this compared to this, for me, this kind of thing is much more interesting to look at. This is very flat. It's very pretty. It's a lovely hue of green. And then you can play with your mixture. I can push this a little warmer by having more of the quinacridone burnt orange in there, or a little bit more to the blue-green by adding more of the ultramarine turquoise in there. Now let's look at the third one. So I will take some of this burnt orange. I might just grab just a little bit more pigment. Maybe a little bit more. There we go. And I'll take that and I will make a little I'm doing this on just a piece of 140-pound cold press Arches using about a size 8 equivalent calligraphy brush. I'll put a link to the brush in the comments. So we've got a little strip of the earth orange, quinacridone burnt orange there. Now I'm just going to dry this. And when you're going to be layering colors on top of each other, you really want to make sure that the initial layer is dry. Reason being is if I go over with a new layer and it's still wet or damp, there's a good chance that I could end up inadvertently lifting this color. And then I could have brush marks in there, and then you're going to find yourself in a vicious circle of trying to correct or go back and add more orange, or, I mean, there's an infinite amount of things that we could try to do to try to fix it and still never end up with the result that we would hope for. So your best scenario, if you're going to be layering a new color over top to get a different result, is to make sure that what's underneath is completely dry. Another little piece of advice that I would recommend, my fingers got close, but I didn't actually do it. You don't want to touch the paint with or the paper surface with your fingertips. We got our oils in our fingertips and things like that. And if you get oil on here, think about water off a duck's back, right? We try to put watercolor and we've got little oil marks on there. It's not going to be as receptive to the paint as if it were not touched. So I have had marks show up in a nice clean sky where I kind of inadvertently picked the paper up and put my thumbprints on it. So best not to do that. So what I would generally do is I use the back of my pinky knuckle there. I just check it, make sure that it's the same temperature all over the paper. You can also kind of check underneath, see if it's cool to the touch, then there's a good chance it's still damp. But yeah, we want to make sure it's completely dry. My brush is clean. I'm grabbing a little bit of this Ultramarine Turquoise. Just kind of control the moisture a little bit there. And I'm going to brush this, but I'm also going to keep a shallow angle to the brush. I don't want to push too hard when I'm coming over the other layer, because I don't want to inadvertently lift anything. So I'm just going to make a stroke, and I'm going to be very gentle with it and just bring it across. Make this maybe a little bit bigger. There. So you can see underneath here, we're getting a new green from mixing these two optically on top, or glazing over top is another term that's used. So we can see that this has dulled down quite nicely. This is a nice dull, sort of bluish green. We've got this green here from mixing it in the palette. And then we have this lovely little green here from mixing it optically by layering one strip of paint and then putting the other one over top, and then getting a new result where they optically mix. So there is a little bit of information for you on color mixing and 3 of the ways that we can do it, both on the paper, mixing it in the palette, and then mixing it optically by layering or glazing a color over top of another. So hopefully you enjoyed that today. Hopefully you've been enjoying the other videos in this series. Like I mentioned earlier, this is now the 12th one. Sorry for the delay. In last week I intended to get one up, but I was a little under the weather. So everything's back up to snuff, and we'll be getting more of these out to you soon. So until the next time, thank you very much for watching this today, and paint on, my friends. Bye for now.